Hey, this is Kieron, Coach's Corner Chats, and joining me is Jack Rolfe. Jack, where are you at and what are you up to?
Yeah, currently in Perth, Australia. So in theory, the most isolated place in the world. Some would say it's the best place in the world. So it's 30 coming up to 38 degrees, which is beautiful Australian summer. Go to the beach every single day, have barbecues on the beach. Living the absolute dream.
What are you up to in Australia other than spending time at the beach and barbecuing?
Yeah, good question. So I actually moved over to Australia 5 years ago from the UK. I picked up the dreadful accent, which would explain a bit of the twang. And I run the coaching lab between Australia and the UK. So I use Australia as a bit of a base to kind of get back into Europe and to get into Asia, supporting coaches, supporting teachers to play more games, to just help them, I guess, right? Because often we put so many resources into players, but often forget the coach. And a lot of people say they help coaches, but I actually don't think they do. And I think they're some of the least supported people in the ecosystem of sport. So spending a lot of time with coaches, spending a lot of time with teachers, helping them get the most out of their sessions, helping them be the best version of themselves. And I probably describe it, Kieron, as making people smile, because I don't think as coaches we probably smile enough. You go to some places and you really wonder uh, what else is going on, because they're it can be so grumpy at times. But I think coaching is the best job in the world, and if we smile more, the players will smile, and it's an absolute win from all angles.
What brought about the whole idea of the coaching lab and recognizing that coaches need that support?
Good question. So we started 7 years ago now from my university study around how do coaches integrate psychological skills, so confidence, communication, problem solving, decision making, all the stuff that, I'll be really honest, I think every single coach tells me they do. I think very few actually do it. So the coaching lab came about as a way of just creating a resource that is really easy for people, not being intrusive to them as a coach, but as a toolbox and a toolkit of different ideas, different ways to engage their players to play more games. And unfortunately, the biggest question in youth sport in particular is, can we play a game? And it should never be that way, because if you want to get better at the game, you need to play it. But unfortunately, you go to so many environments where I just see people learning drills but don't learn the game. And it looks like there's 15 kids waiting for a bus in the middle of a soccer field, which is pretty damn depressing, because coaches think they need to share all the knowledge, and coaching is putting people in lines and telling them what to do. So the coaching lab really started from breaking tradition and really, I guess, changing the game, I would call it, but really helping coaches, helping teachers play more games, but get the most out of those sessions, particularly in those mixed ability groups.
You mentioned Australia kind of being a hub for you. What is it about that location and about Australia, kind of the culture and all that, that makes it such a good place to kind of call home?
Definitely the weather, but it's a very cliche phrase. I guess the other thing would be, I never learned another language at school, which I reflect on and definitely should have done. But the Australians speak English, right? So you can get comfortable very quickly compared to going to an Asian country or Middle East where, English isn't necessarily first language. So there's a bit of home comfort, I guess, in that sort of element to it as well. And it's a real sports capital. It's a real sports hub that some great people have come out of Australia. And I think it's a real hub for creativity, for people to be the best coaches they can be. The scale of the country is pretty vast, pretty like America, which comes with its own challenges. I think if you go to every single state in Australia, you'd probably see a different sort of coaching. And I think you see a different sort of kid as well, because you've got the country and then you got the big city, and all and nothing in the middle of Australia. So a real diverse sort of mix, which I think encourages you to coach and teach slightly differently.
You mentioned earlier moving from the UK to Australia. Were you born and raised in the UK? And if so, what was that experience soccer-wise as a youth?
Yeah, definitely born and raised in the UK. My mum and dad are still there. My sister. Um, what was soccer like in the UK? I probably had a middle. Oh, I did. I had a middle-aged dad that thought he was Jose Mourinho, that thought it was all about him on a Sunday morning, um, shouting, telling people what to do. Yes, I actually don't think my experience of soccer probably was that great. And unfortunately, I think if you ask 99% of kids, I think it's probably the same. And the tough thing about youth sport is, let's be real, that the players don't have the say if they come back every single week. It's the parents. And I've always said, if kids were in charge of their attendance, I don't think youth sport would be where it is in terms of stats, in terms of participation, because yeah, the experience that kids get in sport is so hit and miss, and my experience was definitely a miss. It wasn't the hit, it wasn't the good experience. I remember playing in goal one time because they normally just put the best kids outfield and put the worst kid in goal. So I definitely played in goal quite a few times, and I remember just like getting absolutely smashed with the ball a few times, like going to the back of the net. And I remember my dad just kind of like a bit lost for words about what to say. But the coach just measured success by the scoreline and didn't measure success by engagement or participation or smiles or how many kids came back every single session, which has definitely influenced me as a coach, and probably definitely has influenced the coaching lab in terms of just supporting grassroots coaches, because good coaching, Kieron, is a lottery everywhere in the world.
Where was the kind of that locate time and where you thought to yourself, maybe coaching is something I'd like to get into and give a try and maybe change the experience that players are having?
Yeah, I'm a dreadful dyslexic, for a bit of context. So ended up going to university somehow to study sports psych, and I'm really lucky that I coached all the way along that. And I think teaching was always where I was going to end up. And then I met a lecturer who said, "I think you should be a coach." And I think that one conversation probably really influenced it. But together with that one conversation was an opportunity to coach. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about helping coaches, and particularly helping young people, because it is the best job in the world. But if your first experience of coaching isn't great, you'll never come back. So that's why you really need some good mentors around you. You need a really good environment, particularly in that first experience, because it's that real make or break. And I played a lot of hockey growing up, field hockey, and was half decent, I guess, to a certain degree, and was in and around some England stuff and some junior age group national programs. And the coach, or I didn't get selected for the England team, and the coach said, "Jacko, I reckon you'd be a great coach." And it's just those little conversations that sort of plant the seed of coaching as a job. You don't have to be the middle-aged man to coach in a Sunday league and coach the amateur levels to be a coach. Like, it's paid work. There's opportunities out there, and the more I saw those opportunities of it's a professional career, I think that's probably where the real opportunity kind of grew from.
I always like to ask this, but when people point those things out, what do you think it was that they saw in Jack at that time where they said, you know what, I know you may not be getting selected to move on to the next level in terms of where we're headed, but I see you as being a really good coach. What do you think it is that people may have seen in you at that time?
Yeah, my parents said this the other day, and I thank them for it because they gave me the grounding. Would definitely hope to come across as the person that makes it about other people and not about me. Like, I'm pretty average about talking about myself. Like, I much prefer to talk about other people than talk about successes and challenges that I've had. So I think there's an element of almost that servant leadership, that helping other people before I help myself. So a bit of teamship. I think there's an element of calmness. Like, I've had some really cool experiences in my life, and some tough ones as well, with family bits and bobs and health and all that sort of stuff. And it makes you realize that sport, or let's say coaching, like, there's bigger things in the world. And there's a high performance manager over here, and he has a phrase of, "You're not curing cancer," and that really sticks with me. Like, coaches are not curing cancer, but so often we see, I do in particular, to see people take it so seriously, and they're so self-obsessed and so self-centered that they don't care about the people around them. So I think there's an element of, I really care about the people around me. And I think if you want to be a good coach, you need to care about other people as much as you need to care about yourself. It's actually, you're working for other people. They're not working for you. So I think probably those sorts of traits came across quite naturally. Not that I realized they were good for coaching at the time. And, I guess translated that into the world of coaching and staying true to myself. But yeah, I think those traits and personalities probably came out quite naturally in the way I the way I led the team, the way I spoke to people, the way I conducted myself.
So you get this kind of push toward coaching. How do you make it happen? Does it just kind of fall into place, or do you start reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'd love to start coaching"? What was kind of your first experience at that?
Yeah, this is why Christmas is good, right? Because all these questions come up over Christmas over the dinner table, and someone asked me that same question, a couple of days ago, and I reflected on it now, and I had no desire to be a coach, and I had no desire to be where I am today. That doesn't mean I didn't want to get there, but didn't have any desire. Probably didn't have that self belief to see what the future held. But it was more about if you do a really good job, that's your CV. Like, you're a walking CV in everything you do. So now I own a business, and we have loads of people email me and social media and all this sorts of stuff. And if anyone ever asks for a job, all you do is straight away just go and look on their social media, or you go and pick up the phone and you ask someone what that person's like. And I think because I gave such a good first impression, and because I worked hard and hopefully a good person, I think opportunities sort of came at me. Not that I wanted the opportunities, and I didn't say no to them, but they sort of just appeared because of the way you conduct yourself, because of the way you behave, and because I also really believe this, that the players are your CV. Like, the players tell you how good the coach is. So I 100% go into environments, and the players that you spend time with are not people you want to spend time with, because there's arrogance. They don't say thank you. They don't say good morning. And then you look at the coach, and the coach is exactly the same. And I'm really believe that 100%. The best coaches actually just have the best people with them. I unfortunately see so many coaches that are so self-centered that, yeah, no wonder they don't get as far as they want to get, because the players are their CV. And people remember small little things about coaches so often. And you can never make a second impression, right? Or a second, another first impression. You only get one chance at that. So I think, because I had made a good first impression and really cared about people, and did a good job and a curious learner, I think opportunities probably came towards me.
You mentioned some of those coaches that first impression is so important. Can a coach who's, just from your experience, I'm wondering, can they change? Can you go from maybe a transactional coach to more of a transformational coach in your experience?
If you want to, 100%. And the interesting bit is I do a lot in high performance sport, and 90% of the people in high performance sport are really good people, like amazing, curious learners. Would always talk about, in all the sports, would always talk about they were one type of coach and probably transferred themselves into another type of coach because of their experiences, because of their reflection. And so often I don't see that in the youth level, but the guys at the top level are talking about that the whole time. So when I go into a Premier League football club, that I'm very privileged to do, there's coaches talking about all that stuff around how they've changed as a coach, maybe experiences that have influenced them. But then you go to, a U12 or U10 team, and you see the coach, and it's very much about themselves and not about the players. So I think if there's a desire to change, I think you have to, and you have to be open to, getting support from other people and looking outside of your corner. My best learning's not come from one sport. It's probably come from 5, 6, 7, 8 different sports and all different coaches. But I always ask myself, and I ask myself this regularly on a weekly basis, because we work with so many coaches around the world, do people want to get better? And I actually don't think many people want to get better, unfortunately.
As you're coaching, when does the discussion start coming up of how can I not only help players, but how can I start helping coaches? Like, how does Coaching Lab, is it just a random chat with another coach that's seeing similar things, or how did this even come about?
Yeah, so the Coaching Lab, I guess, a bit of context to what we do, I guess, which will help. So coach development is, it could be one-to-one conversations. So Kieron, you could come to me and you could say, I really need help with this. And we have some online programs and some in-person programs that really support that. Some cross-sport connection. So I'm massive on connecting people from different sports, because actually we all coach people, and they've all got the same problems and the same challenges. So there's an element of what we do is around connecting people, and also the match play cards, the team and player challenge cards that you would see on the website to encourage people to play more games, but also that toolkit to nudge a coach maybe in a certain direction and think, yeah, I'm short of ideas, or I, don't get the kids, or don't give the kids as much ownership as I could, and all those little things. I spend too much time focusing on drills and not the game, and the cards as that resource is how that comes about, and really nudges coaches informally to do that. And then we have some more formal, we have an online course as well to help coaches be a game changer. So play more games, set team challenges, set player challenges, learn from other sports as well. So I'm a big fan of informal learning. I really struggle with the concept of formal education and a coach paying $3,000, $5,000 to go on a coaching course for a couple of months, and suddenly they're the best coach in the world. Well, I think that's pretty much bollocks, if you ask me, if I'm really honest about it. I think I would encourage every single coach to go and spend their time and spend their money going to speak to other people. It's like driving test, right? We used this analogy of a few coaches the other day. You're 18 in the UK, you pass your driving test and you think you're the best driver in the world, but you've never driven at night, you've never driven on the motorway, you've never driven over 5 hours to a long drive to go to somewhere, you've never driven down a country road, but you've got your qualifications, so it means you can drive. And I think coaches often think they're the same. They've got their qualification, but they've never gone to coach a girls group, they've never gone to coach a disability group, they've never gone to coach a different sport. So I think people become obsessed by qualifications but not experiences.
To put all of this into place, where do you start? Like, how do you create, like, I hear match cards, I hear online, I've got some one-on-one type things. We're networking with other coaches. Like, where did you start? And did you have help putting the coaches lab together?
Yeah, one of our biggest helps, and we'll be forever grateful. People might know his name, but Richard Branson's Virgin. They were a backer of us in the first year, and they call it a bright idea, which I'm very grateful for. They helped us kind of bring my ideas to life and maybe formalize them a little bit more into a bit of a business plan, and helped us stay to where we are now in terms of 77 countries around the world, every sport A to Z, high performance elite to the grassroots. And I think it came about through that early discussion at university around sports psychology and how do you integrate psychological skills. Like we said earlier, I think a lot of people say they do it, but I don't think a lot of people do. And it came about, how do I take that research, which is awesome research, but no coach has got time to read 20,000 words. So translated all that research into bite-sized content, I guess, to make that accessible to coaches around the world.
And then when it comes to creating websites and all this type of stuff, is that something that Jack does as well? Do you have your hands in everything?
Yeah, not so much nowadays. We have a couple of freelancers that help us, but my background, or my best subject at school, apart from sport, was graphic design. So I love my graphic design. I love Photoshop and all that sort of stuff. So that creative outlet definitely helped me sort of bring that to life.
And as you look, you talk about 70 plus countries and all that type of stuff. Is there a dream of what this actually looks like when, like, is there a spot where Jack will say, this is what I want the coaching lab to be, this is it?
Yeah, it's every year it amazes me. Like, this year's probably been the biggest year we've ever done. I think we've done 11 countries we've visited this year to spend time with coaches and teachers. I think I've done 48 flights, so it's definitely been the biggest year we've ever done. But the future, I guess, is around, I've always got it, and I've got it on my noteboard here, is we want to be the Uno game of sport. We want every single coach to have a deck of Uno cards. And I think some people would look at the cards and match play cards and think, oh, they're not for me. But Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, the England football team, Rugby Australia, the biggest names in world sport are using them. And they all want to get better as players, as coaches. And if you want world-class players, you need world-class coaches. So yeah, the vision for the future will always be, can we be the Uno game of sport and get as many decks of cards in the hands of coaches? Because we really believe, and it's my natural bias, that if you have a deck of cards, your life will be easier as a coach. You will save planning time, which makes you happier, which then makes the players more engaged. And if you have more engaged players, there's more learning happening. And if they're playing games, they're 100% going to get better at the game. And it's a more individualized approach rather than, putting a blanket over everyone and saying you've all got to do the same thing. So that's the vision, Kieron, to be the Uno game of sport, because there's a deck of Uno cards pretty much in everyone's house or car somewhere around the world.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was, dealing with dyslexia. What has that kind of helped in terms of how you set up the coaching lab? Is that helped you to recognize that players and coaches need support, and we don't always know what people are bringing to the table?
Yeah, I almost wish everyone had dyslexia in a way, because it definitely encourages you to think differently. I definitely think more practical. I definitely think in pictures more than I do words. That idea of, I think when you're a dyslexic, you get used to failing quite often, which means you're just willing to give things a go. And when you go into a coaching world, you just have to be willing to give things a go. It might work, it might not work, but who cares? And there's also an appreciation for particularly the young people you have in front of you, that how you deliver information is not the same for everyone. And this is probably one of the biggest things I help coaches with, is so often everyone just says or delivers their message in the same way and expects all 25 players to understand that. That's rubbish, right? Like, there's 25 different personalities, there's 25 different parents, there's 25 different car journeys to the training field, there's 25 different desires for what football is actually about. So I think that appreciation really, and that calmness to understand there's always a reason why, and thinking slow but acting fast, if that makes sense. So sort of taking your time to go through things, but then if you see something, punch on it and really kind of kick on. And there's also an element of asking the players how they best receive information, and I think that's one of the best questions coaches can ask players is, how can I help you? Or like, how do you want feedback delivered to you? Because some people just want to be told, some people just want 5 minutes, 10 minutes to work that out themselves. So I think that appreciation in particular has definitely helped me connect with those young people.
The other thing I was thinking about is you get Virgin Air and Branson to support you. You're in some really high level clubs. Has there been some kind of down little obstacles that you've run into while putting this together? Because it all sounds like everybody hears 70 plus countries and all this, but has it, I'm sure there's been some stops or spots along the way that have been kind of like, oh, got to work through this.
Oh, I think there's always logistics. I think there's always that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think dyslexia's probably helped in a way of, like I say, you're just used to failing. And I guess I really try and keep my feet on the ground in terms of, it's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is. And I would encourage every single coach to think in that mentality that, just because you're winning doesn't mean you're the best coach in the world. And just because you're losing doesn't mean you're the worst coach in the world. So I think there's an element of, I'm quite a chilled out guy, and it's probably why I live in Australia and go to the beach every day. And, I'm pretty happy to jump on 48 flights every year and travel the world. Like, I'm pretty chilled out around that. And I think what other people would get stressed around, I don't get stressed about, because I've got the best job in the world. We've got the coolest business, helping coaches. I get to speak to coaches and teachers every day, get to go to the best environments, going to spend time at an Arsenal, going to spend time at a Man United and Crystal Palace and West Ham. Like, people would die for those experiences, but I get to do those things almost every single day. So I think there probably has been moments where it's low, but I don't necessarily see them as low, because I'm very privileged in the experiences and the people you get to meet. And I know that the people I spend a lot of time with, and, the environments I get to go into, are places that not everyone will ever get to go into. I'm sure there's a lot of Man United fans that would love to go into Man United Academy, and I'm sure there's a lot of Arsenal fans who would love to go and see a Hale End at Arsenal, and we can do that. Because because they use the cards and we help them. But it's I feel very privileged, I guess, in that respect.
You talked about earlier your parents being a big impact on who you are, your personality traits, and what have you. What was it like to make the decision to say, "Hey, I'm leaving the UK and I'm moving to Australia"?
Yes, pretty big one, I guess. I actually moved, or I came to Australia 8 years ago for about 2 months to spend some time over here as a coach and different schools and whatever. So I had an experience of it before, and probably in the back of my mind always knew I was going to come back. And I think my parents probably knew I was always going to come back as well, Kieron. Arrived in Australia on the 2nd of March on a 6-month sort of gap year, I guess, and a period sabbatical that I said I'd do, and had my return flight booked for the end of the 6 months, and just interested to see what the first 6 months goes like. And COVID hit in the first 2 weeks, and I thought the whole world was going to end, and I didn't really know where I was going to be. And in hindsight, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know there's people not in such a lucky situation than me, but to me, it was the best thing that ever happened, because I felt so grateful for where I was. But also my parents probably knew how lucky I was. I wasn't in the middle of London or middle of UK and cold, dark, and locked away for months on end. And Australia was very different to that. So I think there's an element of they knew I was happy and knew I was comfortable. And I was really lucky that we actually already had customers and users of the coaching lab in Australia. So I felt very at home very quickly, because they almost became my friends and my straight sort of connections, because you could pick up the phone and chat coaching to people that spent time and money with us. So there was a bit of a connection piece there already that made me feel really comfortable.
I was going to ask, do you think that the pandemic has helped a little bit where coaches now, I think mental health and the psychology piece, which you said now people say they want to take care of it, but they don't actually do. I think we're at that point where we recognize that we need to deal with that, but then actually doing strategies that actually are helpful. Do you think the pandemic has helped that and has kind of been a little bit better for you now that you're connecting with coaches across multiple sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think it's helped Coaching Lab for sure. I think my biggest challenge to coaches is, and this person shall remain nameless, a great online coach that I take loads of ideas from and thought it was wicked, and watched a video of them in person, and was probably really disappointed with how they connected with the people and the young people they had in front of them. And I think that because they spend so much time online and don't spend enough time working with people in real life, you lose that connection. And coaching does not happen online. It does not happen on Twitter. It happens with the people you have in front of you. And I think the challenge for coaches is to not spend so much time just doing content and putting stuff on Twitter and Instagram, whatever, but then actually forget about your own coaching. Because if you want to be a good coach, having 25,000 followers or 10,000 followers on social media does not make you a good coach. You've got to have the connection with people. And I think that's where COVID has its challenges, right? Because everyone got used to spending time online and doing bits and bobs. But are you a better coach for it? Does that actually hold you accountable? So a lot of people would put up content on whatever platform and be cool, whatever. Then you go and watch them deliver a session, and it's the complete bloody opposite to what they're preaching. And I think that's the biggest challenge. You need to coach who's in front of you and not coach the session plan.
You mentioned earlier that when you're talking to high level Premier League, they're talking about all of these little things. But then when you get to the youth level, they're not. Why do you think there is that disparaging difference between the two?
I think selfishly, from a high performance angle, I think those guys probably need to be open a little bit more and probably share some of that stuff, and share what goes on inside those environments and make common sense a little bit more common, I would say. And I guess the coaching lab helps in terms of making that happen. So I think there's an element of definitely there needs to be an open door, not policy, but just a little bit more sharing around what good practice really looks like. And I unfortunately believe, and I see this almost in every single country I go to, I think coaches are in it for themselves. And I think coaches think that what coaching is I need to share all the information I have in my brain and give that to the players. Whereas I'll be really honest, I actually don't think a lot of coaches have a lot of knowledge. So I don't want the players to be as good as me as a coach. I want them to be better than me. And I think the best coaches are the ones that use the players as the coaches. Like, they're playing the game. They're the ones that are making the decisions. And yeah, I would never want a player to be as, like me as a player. Like, I want them to be better than me as a coach. So, and if I want that, I need to give that responsibility and ownership to the young people in front of me.
You talked about getting an Uno set of cards in everybody's hands. How has the match cards kind of changed throughout the, from the beginning to now? What things have you kind of, not to give away secrets or anything like that, but how important is it, I guess, feedback from coaches that are using it that have helped you kind of change it over the, the course of your 5 to 8 years now?
Yeah, it's helped us release new sets of cards. So match play cards for the original set, which is the team and the player challenge cards. And then we released reflection match play cards, which is some awesome open-ended questions. There's 50 odd questions in there that players can't answer yes or no to really help coaches ask good quality questions and really get the players to think about their experiences. And then after that, again, on more feedback, animal match play cards for the youngsters. So for that sort of age 5 to 8, maybe 5 to 9, using the same concepts as the other cards, but just a little bit more playful language and a few different challenges. So yeah, feedback's always played a part in terms of developing the new products and the new cards.
The one thing that I recognize is you seem pretty young, but you seem so wise and like have such a big, like, how old are you? And then it's just like the way that you look at things. Has this been always something that you've been that kid that was, in school, younger, that was always kind of like not as focused on the activity, but more of like what's going on in the whole classroom type of thing? Have you always been big picture, self-reflecting, self-aware, even as a youth?
So I'm 28, 29 early next year, which is scary, but not so scary, I guess. Have I always been like this? I think I've always had a calmness. I think I've always had an eye on the future, because I think it's important that you look into the future rather than look at the now. And I think you have to begin with the end in mind. And I think that's really important. I think probably at school, everyone thought I was pretty damn boring because I was probably Mr. Sensible, in terms of I always gave a couple of options to an argument, or I kind of gave a little bit perspective and context. So I think I was probably that sort of person, and still remain that person. I think my mates probably pick up the phone quite a bit to me and ask different advice and ask different questions, because I'd like to think I'm quite level-headed in that response. And I guess, Kieron, like, from an early age, I had some really cool experiences. I had mates that were working in the Premier League, had mates that were working in national teams in field hockey that I got experiences of quite early. So I knew what good coaching looked like, from an early age. And I think that really set me up to be, I guess, quite mature. I think probably when I first started coaching, I thought it was all about the X's and O's, but not the Jills and Joes. Not about the people. I thought it was all about the session plan, and I had to give them all the details and whatever. And then, the more you see about other coaches, and I was really grateful that happened early for me. I probably my maturity came out. Someone described the other day as a bit of a Gareth Southgate combination with Matthew Syed, if you know who Matthew Syed was. And I thought it was probably a pretty good analogy, because you wouldn't see Gareth Southgate getting crazy, but I know he's a pretty curious learner from what I know and from the experiences I've had in that environment. Curious learner, and I think I'd be the same.
You've mentioned hanging out at the beach, barbecues. How important is being able to kind of, or maybe I'll ask, can you ever turn off the coaching lab brain and just kind of be, I'm just Jack hanging out here in Australia? And if so, what things do you do to kind of just like maybe have balance?
I have a lot of mates that don't work in sport, so it's nice to go to a party or a coffee with someone that literally has zero idea and probably zero care about what I do. So it's so nice to kind of yeah, spend time with people that are not from the same culture or same environment. I guess there's an element of that. Like my parents couldn't really care less about sports, so like that sort of release is quite good because you're not going for dinner having those conversations around work. But I use work as a really loose term because it's not work, right? Like helping coaches go into the best teams in the world and spending time in those environments, like that's not work. Like that's just conversations, and I feel very, very lucky to do that.
That was one of the things I was thinking about is what has the experience been in terms of like when you're in Australia versus somewhere in Asia, somewhere in the UK or the States or what have you. Is there a lot of similarities, even though our cultures are a little bit different, or is there noticeable differences in terms of the coaching, the style of play, all those kind of things?
I definitely find myself saying the same thing on repeat, probably in every single country that I go to. And, it'd be those things of you need to play more games, you need to talk less, you need to give more ownership to the kids, you just need to calm the hell down. So I definitely find myself saying the same things on repeat. I spent a lot of time in Asia. I've been to China twice this year, Thailand and Singapore and whatever around that area. And probably in those countries, there's a bit of a culture that the adult is in charge, a lot more maybe than other countries. So you're breaking tradition and breaking the trend when you're giving the young people in front of you a bit of ownership and a bit of responsibility to be in control of the game. So I definitely think that's down the higher end in those countries, but that's the same in every single country, but just probably less in others. Um, yeah, I think Australia is probably 15, 20 years behind the rest of the world in terms of coaching in every single sport. I think the UK is ahead in many ways. The opportunities to learn, the opportunities to get better, the understanding of what good practice looks like is probably pretty big time in the UK, and that's a product of different people in different positions. But yeah, definitely think the UK has probably led the way in that space of helping players, and you can see what the translation is like in terms of players coming through pathways and academies, and also the same for coaches, being involved in the game, being around the world.
The other thing I was just thinking about is what is it like to have to recognize that you might have to have some difficult conversations? Like it sounds like, the reflection cards are awesome for players and for coaches, but you talk about sometimes the coach is almost blind to the fact that they're the problem. You talk about first impact and all that type of stuff. How do you kind of at least push a little bit to open their eyes without like alienating the coach, if that makes sense?
Yeah, two things. You have to have connection with someone before you have correction. So often I see correction before the connection piece. You have to have the connection before the correction. So I think that's definitely one. And I always play devil's advocate. I always put it as a question. I always, not always, but often get the kids to do it for me, because I know a coach, if they can see the kids do it, they think it works. So there's an element of they have to see it to believe it. So yeah, how can you use the kids to influence the coach? I think that's a really positive way, particularly when you're working with a coach, to do that.
As you talk about how much you enjoy everything about the coaching lab and working and all those types of things, how cool is it just even in this conversation to hear how your experience as a player was not a positive for you, and now to look back and see how cool has it been for you to kind of recognize like, okay, this is making an impact. Like, man, if I had a coach that was going through this, had opportunities to play with these cards, how different my experience would have been.
Yeah, Christmas is a really good period for that, right? It's probably the only couple of weeks that I sort of get slower in the year. It's just a really nice reflective time, and it's why I always love doing a podcast, because yeah, you become quite reflective. I'm pretty average at reflecting on myself. I normally care about other people before I care about myself, but yeah, it's definitely, the impact has been huge, and if we celebrated 7 years or maybe 8 years in September this year. So yeah, that growth in particular, and yeah, going around the world and seeing people use the cards and then seeing the impact that has on young people. And I know that there's definitely kids that are playing sport now that probably would have stopped if the coach wasn't using the cards, because they would have been playing less games. The coach would have been shouting all the time. So I think from that side, it's pretty cool to know that it's having an impact on engagement of coaches, but also that level of how many players are still playing the game.
Jack, this chat has been awesome, and that is a perfect way to shut this thing down. This is Kieron, Coach's Corner Chats with Jack Rolfe, and I'm out. Peace.